Facebook CEO in the hot seat. Mark Zuckerberg apologizes to U.S. senators for a massive data breach, but avoids questions about how his company might be regulated more closely. So what can come out of his testimony, and what steps can be taken to ensure better privacy for social media users? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Folly Thibault. After a 5-hour-long testimony before the U.S. Congress on Tuesday, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg managed to walk a fine line as he came under fire from lawmakers. He apologized for a range of problems that have beset the social media giant, including the lack of data protection, but didn't promise to support new regulations. Zuckerberg is being questioned by U.S. Congress committee members over 2 days. He's to answer questions on how his company handled data in the wake of a massive users' privacy breach. We'll get to our guests in just a moment, but first, Alan Fisher has our report from Washington.
Ditching his favourite grey T-shirts for a suit, this was a polished Facebook CEO with a performance to match. Mark Zuckerberg apologised for the massive data breach that impacted 87 million users worldwide.
We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a big mistake. And it was my mistake, and I'm sorry.
But the importance of this appearance was not lost on one senator.
This should be a wake-up call for the tech community. We want to hear more, without delay, about what Facebook and other companies plan to do to take greater responsibility for what happens on their platforms.
The core issue was summed up with one question from Democrat Dick Durbin.
Mr. Zuckerberg, would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
No.
Mark Zuckerberg was called in front of the Senate after it was discovered millions of users' data was improperly obtained by a UK-based political consultancy, Cambridge Analytica. They used that information to target ads to help Donald Trump's presidential campaign and the Brexit referendum in the UK. The Facebook founder says steps will be taken to ensure such a data breach can never happen again. But one senator asked if he was ready to follow through on that promise.
I believe you have all the talent. My question is whether you have all the will to help us solve this problem.
Yes, Senator.
Do you believe the European regulations should be applied here in the U.S.?
Regardless of whether we implement the exact same regulation, I would guess that it would be somewhat different because we have somewhat different sensibilities.
Perhaps the most contentious exchange came when Republican Ted Cruz accused Facebook of political bias.
Are you aware of any ad or page that has been taken down from Planned Parenthood?
Senator, I'm not, but let me just...
How about MoveOn.org?
Sorry?
How about MoveOn.org?
I'm not specifically aware of those.
How about
cases.
any Democratic candidate for office?
I'm not specifically aware. I mean, I'm not sure.
Mark Zuckerberg revealed Facebook is looking into potential Russian links to the Cambridge Analytica breach, and also that the company has cooperated with Special Counsel Robert Mueller, who's investigating possible collusion between the Russians and Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Mark Zuckerberg spent the weekend preparing for this appearance, and it showed. He'll now face members from the US House at a separate hearing on Wednesday, with the threat of greater regulation for the entire tech industry standing on the other side of that performance. Alan Fisher, Al Jazeera, on Capitol Hill.
Here's a reminder of what the controversy is about. On March 17th, the New York Times and the UK's Observer newspaper reported that data from Cambridge Analytica acquired millions of Facebook users' personal information. The story was revealed with the help of the co-founder of the UK-based company and now whistleblower, Christopher Wylie. The data was reportedly sold to Cambridge Analytica and used for political purposes linked to the 2016 US presidential election and the Trump campaign. Cambridge Analytica said the data was destroyed in 2015, but there were reports that not all of it was deleted. Facebook then confirmed that up to 87 million users' details may have been improperly shared with the political consultancy firm. Now, rewind to 2014, when about 270,000 of the social network's users took an online personality survey via a third-party quiz. This gave access not only to their Facebook information, but to that of their friends. Facebook says this violated company policy, and it has since tightened up the rules of user consent. Well, let's get the views of our guests now. From Palo Alto, California, joining us by Skype is Larry Magid, who's the CEO of ConnectSafely.org, an internet safety, privacy and security organization. In London, Jennifer Pybus, lecturer of digital culture and society at King's College London. And in New York, also by Skype, is Jim Anderson, CEO of Social Flow, a distribution and monetization platform for publishers. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for your time. Larry, if I can start with you in the U.S. What do you make of Mark Zuckerberg's performance in front of these U.S. lawmakers? Did he clear the misunderstandings about the Cambridge Analytica scandal?
Well, first, I thought he did a pretty good job keeping his cool, but I don't think he cleared a lot of the misunderstandings. One of the things that senators kept asking over and over again is about selling data, and he had to say several times that Facebook doesn't sell data to advertisers. Instead, it sells people, it sells users, based on certain demographics or interests. He also did not, I think, adequately address exactly why there was such a delay between the time that Facebook found out about this breach with Cambridge Analytica and when the public found out about it. He did say that they thought they had dealt with it, but even then, they should have disclosed it. So I wasn't happy with that aspect of it. And I think the senators, some of them are tech savvy, but many of them kind of indicated that they really don't understand how Facebook works.
Right. It's interesting you say that. Jennifer, most of the senators who asked Zuckerberg questions didn't seem to have a clue on how Facebook worked or what the solutions to its problems were, or even what they were trying to achieve by bringing in Zuckerberg to testify. Did you learn anything new from his testimony on Tuesday?
I don't think there's really a lot that we've learned from his testimony. Maybe in some respects more questions, because one of the points that he was making was that there was a delay and the data should have been deleted. But why was the data given in the first place? And I think this is actually a better starting point in order to understand what is Facebook. And at its core, it's not just a social networking platform, it's a social advertising platform. And if we then take another step back and ask, well, if we're selling people to advertisers, what Facebook does is it partners with a whole host of different marketing companies and firms and works with them to take data and interesting cultural facts about their users and provides it with them to help fill out profiles, and also takes data from those partners to learn more about the people that is serving back to others. So it's quite a very complicated situation that a lot of people don't fully appreciate or understand.
Jim, your thoughts. A recent survey by Gallup found that 43% of Americans are very concerned about Facebook's invasions of privacy. Do you think they would have been reassured by what they heard yesterday from Mark Zuckerberg?
Well, I don't know about reassured, because I don't know who can sit there and watch 5 hours of testimony. I mean, it was, after a while, it becomes quite boring, which I think is probably to Facebook's interest. I will point out, though, people very much, when you ask them questions about privacy, of course, we all want our privacy. And I thought it was great political theater when the senator asked Mark Zuckerberg if he'd be okay with, describing what hotel he's staying at. Of course, he wouldn't want that to happen. But this is a social network. Social networks are inherently designed to share information, and social sharing of information is almost diametrically opposed to privacy. So I think that's the real issue there. How do you reconcile the competing preferences and desires of the users, and how does Facebook do that?
Yeah, but Jim, as Larry said, perhaps the only time that Zuckerberg seemed to be under pressure was when he was asked by Senator Kamala Harris to explain why Facebook didn't disclose the Cambridge Analytica matter to the public in 2015. And why it waited until it was forced by media to do so when it was reported by the media. If you can explain to us the extent of Facebook's data monitoring and why the company hasn't been more transparent with users on how data is used and how it's been abused. Why this lack of transparency? What are they hiding, basically?
Well, I'd say there's a couple of things. Number one, transparency sounds good when you sort of say, do people want transparency? Most people will say yes. But transparency, there's a massive amount of data. I mean, we're talking terabytes, petabytes. I can't even quantify how much data that would overwhelm anybody's reasonable ability to process it. It's also, I'm sure Facebook would say there's proprietary information in there, and not just proprietary to Facebook, but proprietary to its users and to its advertisers. So you sort of get into this sticky situation where when you say, I want transparency, and most of us would say that we think that's generally admirable, the actual execution of transparency is fraught with quite a number of challenges. And I would suspect that Facebook's answers around that, sort of encompass at least a couple of those points.
Larry in Palo Alto, Jim seems to say that Facebook shouldn't be taking the blame, all the blame anyway, for what goes wrong on its platform. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think Facebook has to take responsibility for what goes on in its platform. But having said that, there are other factors. For example, Zuckerberg's decision not to disclose his hotel room. Well, I travel a lot, and sometimes I decide to disclose my hotel room, and sometimes I don't. And I have control over that. I don't think there's any way that the public could find out where I was staying via Facebook if I didn't post it. So I think that's not, I think as theatrical as it was sort of an unfair question to imply that has anything to do with Facebook. But at the end of the day, I think that Facebook does have responsibility. It created the platform. It has to not only build privacy tools, it has to make them easily accessible. And I think it needs to change some of its defaults. I don't think that users should have to read a 40-page manual like I once wrote on Facebook in order to understand their privacy settings. It should be simple, and the defaults should pretty much be in favor of privacy until the user decides that they want to disclose more information.
Jennifer, he pushed back, Mark Zuckerberg, during his testimony on Tuesday, pushed back hard against the need for regulation. He seemed to deflect all the questions on this. Why do U.S. lawmakers in the first place need his consent to regulate Facebook? And, when they talk regulation, what exactly are they looking at, and over what period of time are they talking about regulating?
I mean, I think this is a big question that a lot of people should be asking right now. And I don't know if anyone actually knows the answer, which is part of the problem. I think when you begin with the idea of regulation, we have to think about the fact that, Mark Zuckerberg, with 2 billion users, that's an incredible amount of people, an incredible amount of data to be using, sharing, and adding to the $40 billion they made in profit from advertising last year. So I think step one, which was already said, is we need to have some kind of accountability in terms of the data that's being used. If you're taking my data, then I would like to know not just how you're using it, but who you're selling it to, and then what happens to it, so that at least I can make some kind of informed decision about its use. Secondly, in terms of, are we going to think about Facebook as a platform or a publisher?
Right.
Because all the other media industries have regulation. Why are these platforms not being regulated in some kind of way?
Jim, do you agree with that? Can Facebook be regulated, do you think?
Yeah. First of all, I think it's fair to point out
that Facebook can be regulated, and I think it will be regulated.
One second, Larry. Let me just get Jim's thoughts on this, and I'll get back to you in a second. So do you think Facebook can be regulated? And when we're talking about regulation, what exactly do we want to regulate, and over what time frame are we looking at?
Yeah, I think that's the real crux of it. I think Facebook is certainly open to, they know that some kind of regulation is coming. It's a question of how much of a light touch. I think the most productive conversation is in and around the advertising. There have been proposals to make political ads much more transparent. Who bought them and who did they target?
Right.
You could extend that to all advertising on Facebook or any other technology platform. I would suspect the platforms themselves would think that's too far, but I think that's a great conversation to have. If people are using the platform to pay to deliver messages to certain audiences, does the public have a right to know? I think that's a fascinating question that will get asked and will be part of the debate, probably over the next 6, 12, 18 months.
Right. Larry in Palo Alto, your thoughts on this about regulation. And just coming back to my question, why do these U.S. senators, the lawmakers, even need Mark Zuckerberg's opinion or consent to introduce regulation over Facebook?
Well, of course, they don't need his consent. The whole purpose of regulating is for the government to say we are in charge,
right,
and we get to decide. They obviously should get them involved. They should hear their side of the story, because there could be some technical issues. One of the things the government needs to be careful about is regulating the technology.
Right.
They can set policy, but they don't want to set the actual technology. But to the issue of publishing, from the standpoint of advertising, Facebook is like a publisher. So like the New York Times, for example, it can decide what ads it wants to accept. But unlike the New York Times, it doesn't have full control over editorial. The Times could decide, or any publisher, or Al Jazeera for that matter, who they want to bring on as guests, who they want to bring on as columnists, what articles they want to publish, what programs they want to broadcast. Facebook is a platform. If I decide to go on Facebook and say something completely outrageous, they can take it down if it violates their terms of service, but they're not going to pre-approve it. And they haven't decided, well, Larry Magid's a good guy, we're going to let him on the platform because we think he has important things to say. No, I just signed up like the other 2 billion people.
Right.
So I think it's important that we recognize that it's a platform where anybody can say within some limitations anything they want. And that does differ from a television station or a newspaper.
Okay. Jennifer, your thoughts on regulation and also coming back to the European model. They're talking about introducing the GDPR in the EU very soon. I imagine that will be an interesting test for the US. Do you think the type of regulation that exists right now in Europe could work in America?
That's a big question. I mean, they're really different. They're really different places, so I'm not entirely sure. Able to comment on that.
Right.
I know from a European perspective, I think privacy is much more of an issue that's on the table, especially with what's happening with the EU right now. So maybe because of that, there's some possibilities around stronger regulation. But I think, as was said before, I think one of the starting places is to come back to the way in which this data is being used. And I think that we need to have a much bigger discussion. So, for example, when the Republicans went to Facebook and said, look, we want to make ads for our campaign, Facebook said, great. We have a whole bunch of different tools that we can use to help you. We can use a tool that helps you pair names that you already have with members in our database. We have a tool that allows you to find people that we already have that will find similar people. And then we can also tap on our third-party members and ask them what data they have so you can learn even more about the people that you already have.
Right.
So there's a lot of sharing that's going on that we need to start by understanding, and then from here have a bigger discussion around what does privacy mean and what does that mean for the user.
Jim, the very business model of Facebook is to make money by selling online ads based on what it learns about its users on its platform. Some would say this is a flawed business model. So could the answer be in Facebook changing this business model? Do you see that happening?
I don't see that happening at all. It clearly could be if people thought that was the case. But Facebook is just one of many advertising-supported businesses. Just look at the television broadcast model or the cable television model in the United States. It's based in large part on advertising as well. And so there's a long history of ad-supported businesses. Facebook is one of the most successful and profitable companies in the world right now. Yes, they could change, but I don't see that happening in any realistic scenario.
They've said they were going to be
about cable.
Go on, Larry,
if I
go
can
on.
comment about cable news. When I watch cable news, I have to sit through advertising for medical devices that I hopefully will never be in the market for.
Right.
When I go on Facebook, the ads I see are actually products that I'm interested in. Now, I'm not justifying necessarily collecting data about me, but one of the benefits of that is you do get more relevant ads. And Facebook obviously takes advantage of that. But it turns out that consumers actually prefer that.
Right. But Larry, Facebook says they've been making fixes lately since this controversy began in the last few months, actually. They've been making quite a lot of fixes, but these seem to be happening very quickly. Are they thinking this through? I mean, in a few months or a few years, are we not going to be hearing about another scandal relating to these fixes?
Well, having been a Facebook observer and a member of the Safety Advisory Board for more than a decade now, I can tell you that they've been through this rodeo many times before. In fact, in 2010, at a press event, I asked Mark Zuckerberg why he felt comfortable trusting third-party apps. I said, there are going to be thousands of these developers. How do you know that all of them are going to be honest and are going to be fair and treat data correctly? And he didn't have a good answer for that. It took him 8 years to figure out the answer. But and only after the Cambridge Analytica fiasco. So yes, they are making changes. Some of these have been in the works, but others are, I think, precipitated by the crisis.
Right.
And that's not a good way to manage a company, but I think it's necessary given the situation they're in.
What impacts, Jennifer, do you see this scandal having on Facebook or has had on Facebook already?
I mean, I think the biggest impact from the public's perspective is the question of trust. How do we trust this social media platform where there's been such a huge breach in terms of personal data? But maybe maybe there's also a ripple effect that's happening as well, because on the one hand, this is a unique crisis to Facebook. On the other hand, the terms and conditions that led to this breach are pretty much identical for all social media platforms, whether you're on Instagram, also owned by Facebook, WhatsApp, Snapchat, etc. So maybe people are now,
are they
as a
losing
result
users?
of this, asking bigger questions.
Are they losing users as a result of this?
I mean, Facebook has been losing users now for quite some time, especially young people. They don't want to be on Facebook, mostly because all their parents are there. They don't want to be on a lame platform where their parents are. They're growing in terms of 40 to 55-year-olds. But does that mean they can keep renewing themselves? I think that's a question. I think that's also a question that Mark Zuckerberg fears as well, which is why he keeps reinventing himself. It's the reason why he bought Instagram. It's also the reason that he bought WhatsApp.
Right. Jim in New York, do you think Facebook can recover from this scandal? Will Facebook's business model be dented in terms of advertising from this scandal and in terms of what people publish from now on? Or can they recover from this?
I think they will recover, and they can recover. Really, your question, what will happen after this? I mean, a lot of it depends on what Facebook does. I mean, they certainly are vulnerable to continued outrages, scandals, regulation. All of those types of things could affect their business. I suspect we're talking about more 5- and 10-year impacts on their business than anytime soon. You talked about the number of users and are they losing users? Well, they've got more than 2 billion people on the planet using Facebook. I don't know a business on Earth that wouldn't want 2 billion customers. So they've got an incredible position of strength. And while they may very well suffer some losses, because that's just inevitable at some point, they've got a large base from which to work from. And I think they'll be fine for the foreseeable future.
Larry, do you agree with Jim? He says Facebook will recover from this scandal. And perhaps if you could tell us what you expect this testimony from Mark Zuckerberg to deliver. I mean, could we see any outcome, any positive outcome from this testimony before U.S.
I mean,
Congress?
Facebook still has room to grow globally in the developing world, and they are investing in bringing the internet to places where it doesn't exist. So they do have some growth potential globally. I think young people in America, at least in Western Europe, are moving to other platforms, including their own Instagram. In terms of its testimony, I don't know. I think it's going to probably just placate Congress. Congress is also dealing with many other issues. We may be on the verge of military action in Syria. We've got the president making news every day regarding the Russia investigation, et cetera. So I think they're just going to move on. And Mark Zuckerberg will come back to Menlo Park, California, and will resume business. And things will just go on. I mean, hopefully they've learned some lessons and they're not going to repeat the same mistakes. But inevitably, they'll make some new mistakes, as they always do, because this is a fast-moving company.
All right. Jennifer, in London, you have the last word. Do you see this scandal, this Cambridge Analytica scandal in Facebook, changing the way other social media platforms operate?
I don't know if they necessarily change the way, but I think they'll be a lot more careful in how they operate. I think that Facebook is unique because they branched out maybe too soon, because they have their Facebook elections site where political parties can go to them and seek help. So I think that they kind of put themselves in a vulnerable position like that, exposing themselves to the technologies that they've been using for the last 10 years for advertising and now how they're being used for politicians.
What about regulation?
We'll
Do you think regulation will negatively impact Facebook and the way people view it?
I think that regulation maybe is a positive way of impacting these platforms for the user, but in terms of Facebook and their agenda to make money and sell advertising, that's a problem for them. So we'll see how that gets negotiated, because I think that Mark Zuckerberg has carefully tap danced around this issue for a very good reason, and that's because he knows full well that if it gets regulated, it's going to impact on his bottom line.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you for a very interesting discussion. Larry Magid in Palo Alto, Jennifer Pybus in London, and Jim Anderson in New York. Thank you all for being on this edition of Inside Story. And thank you for watching. You can also watch this program again anytime by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Folly, Thibault, and the whole team here at Inside Story, thank you for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow.